So we come to the last slide, and you know, as we know, things are changing. I think there's additional discussions that are going to take place here tonight about what the available funds are, but those are not represented in this slide. What you can take from this slide is, again, to kind of show you the story. We began with a Governor's House 1 submission. That took place in early January, and at that point in time, if you use our adjusted budget request, we were about $376,000 in the red on our budget. As the budget process continued, the House Ways and Means came out with a budget figure that was actually different from the Governor's budget. At the same time, there were changes in the formulas we used internally in terms of how we allocate the available funds that our town has. So at that stage, we saw a budget gap of $242,000. So most recently, we're using the Senate figures, and as Dr. Trout indicated, the Senate budget was the worst. That came out days after the April revenue figures were issued. April is the most important month in the state's budget process, because April is the month that normally people will pay their state income taxes if they owe money. So there was an expectation of what was going to happen in April, and it didn't come true. So the Senate was forced to make the drastic local aid cuts that we see that are reflected in these numbers here. So in closing, you can see that our current budget gap is in that $600,000 range. That does not include the budget unknowns that we just went over on the previous slide.
300,000.
So the point here was to give you an overview of where we stand as we move towards town meeting.
So the first I'm going to ask of the committee is to take a position on the budget unknowns. Right now, they're not factored into the adjusted budget of $22,960,860. And Council, that we have a better understanding, let me just ask a couple of questions. We've got 3 new students moving into town that we will have to provide services for starting in September?
Well, actually, June 1.
June 1, okay.
That week. That
So
week.
these are not a possibility, these are absolutely our students, and the bill will be $146,000.
That should be added to the budget.
I agree.
If that's a known, and it wasn't in the budget before, I think that has to be added to the budget. I don't see how we can't.
On the second item, the Senate decrease in the circuit breaker, is that number as firm as you can get?
Well, it's the worst case scenario. When the Senate meets with the House and comes out with a number, I suspect it's fair to say it won't be any worse than that. But that's the current information. What we do here is we go by the most recent information we have, and that's the most recent information.
So would we add 1 to the budget, and would the $152,000, would we subtract that from the available funds? Is that how we would work that? So our available funds would actually go down by $152,000?
Same difference, but yes.
But we
I would probably,
Just add
I would add it.
just add them both to the budget?
Add both.
that would be my
Well, but
approach, yes.
So 298 on top of the 22,960.
If you feel that way, does any other member feel that we should keep these outside of the budget? Hold off on? Okay.
They seem real.
So don't you want to give us a motion for a new number?
I'll make a motion that we add the 2 budget unknowns totaling $298,000 to our adjusted budget request, which would then make the request, let's see how good my math is, 23 million, I can't do this, $258,860, is that right?
Cal?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Oh,
Go ahead.
My question is, on the budget gap on your slide, Carl,
Yes.
does it reflect the $210,000 that I called you
No,
on?
sir.
It does not.
That hasn't been taken into account?
No, as soon as we
We'll
vote on
take it
this,
up.
we'll take.
Okay.
Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. So we have a new budget number, which raises that 663,000 by another 298.
So it's 961.
Can I ask a question, please?
Go ahead.
I know we've had this conversation before, and I know that we have met with legislators regarding state mandates for special education and them not funding, and then becoming a community responsibility. And while we're on this subject, because that's where we're at, I know I've asked you this before, face to face, and I guess I'm just going to ask it in public. And it stems from a comment that Ms. Driscoll just made about requirements and things like that. I guess I want to understand, at what point will you and your colleagues across Massachusetts and across the United States of America, if that's what it takes, send the bill back to the state when they say, or overturn your ruling and say there is no available money? You pay the bill. Because what else is it going to take to get the legislators to listen to us, because they haven't listened to us? They're not listening to you, they're not listening to us. At what point, when they send the responsibility back to you and to your colleagues in every community to fund special education, at what point will we turn it back and say there is no available money? Pay the mandates.
Well, that's a very hard question, and I know a lot of groups, including superintendents, have been working diligently, not only with the legislature, but with the Department of Ed, both at the state and federal level, to bring about change and reform in terms of IDEA and how it impacts on local communities. I also think that there's a lot of work going on with the whole effort to collaborate and to try to find new ways to have inter-district collaboration, not just in special education, but in all areas. And I know that I've been involved in that, as well as many of my colleagues as well. The work that we have done with the SEAM Collaborative and the North Shore Collaborative, both special education collaboratives that we belong to as a community, I think have made some positive gains. But ultimately, it does come down to a funding question. And I'm not sure how we can change that. I can't send the bill back. If I send the bill back, then I'm going to be held accountable for that. And the way in which we'll pay is that money will be withheld from any federal money that's coming to North Reading. So that's the consequence for that. And I'm certainly not going to jeopardize the well-being for all kids by not, by taking some level of a protest to that level. I know the Superintendent's Association has been very vocal in terms of its position papers on special education. I think in a way it's also tied into some of the issues around charter schools and the issue around school choice that we'll be dealing with later on tonight. So we take stands in those areas where we feel we can be effective and lobby. On the other hand, I'm not going to make unwise decisions that would jeopardize all children here. And most importantly, when it comes down to it, I have the responsibility to make sure that every child in the town of North Reading is receiving the best education that we can provide.
I think it is, it's fair to say, without saying too much, that every time we have placement, we discuss it, and if we think that it's wrong for that child to go outside of what we can provide, we weigh whether we're going to win this or not. We have over the years, and we are actively involved in fighting through legal channels, placements made against our recommendation, and we don't have a winning record. So we're very careful when we choose which ones to fight. They are always placed because of the special ed plan, and so it's very sensitive, it's very heartbreaking for the family, And we have to think about the limited funds the town has, but I think that we've always done a very good and fair job in the decision-making. But the courts aren't always on our side. They usually gear towards the parents' wishes and the child's needs over and above the financial concerns. But we do take them to task.
And each time we do that, we have to take into account that there's going to be at least $50,000 in legal fees. And if we lose, that's added on to the bill. And that's why we really have to study it, each case carefully before we move forward with it.
That's what we do every time we go into executive session. That's what we're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to extend that thought a little bit further, I mean, and I understand where you're coming from. I certainly can understand that your hands are tied. And I'm just wondering if, I don't know what kind of other options we have, but realistically, you're saying you have the responsibility to give us the best education, our kids the best education they can get. But you're talking about hiring subpar teachers potentially, because now you're looking at cost, which is absolutely scary as heck to me. You know, you're talking about larger class sizes, you're talking about all these other things, and, you know, we're restricted by the budget, sure. But all these issues, they're not going to go away. And I mean, at what point do we finally get to that point where we can't fight the state, we can't fight the Fed, we're going to have to take these cuts, and you know that we're not going to be able to pass an override, because that never happens in this town. So at what point do we just lose our accreditation? Do we lose it? At what point does it get to that point? And then people say, oh, well, maybe we can do something. I understand where you're coming from as far as not being able to fight. You have to pick your battles. But is there some kind of grassroots thing to it? Is there some way, I mean, if organizations like Stand for Children and organizations, other types of organizations across the state, and if you guys don't have the power to make a change, who can? And how can we do it? Has anybody put together ideas on it? Is there some way we can get involved to do this?
We have to be careful not using the word subpar. You said not us.
I said potentially,
But-
because you say
Right,
qualified.
but I would just like to point out that there's a lot of young adults that graduate college with the hopes of becoming a school teacher, and that's a wonderful career choice. But what you want to avoid is having too many unexperienced teachers at once in a district that lost its mentor programs a couple of budget cuts ago. It's not in the best interest of students to bring in that much inexperience and not have a mentor system and a nice balance on your teams. But we have dropped to that level. And right now, we've run out of good ideas. But certainly we have one that Bob's ready to share with us. Now that we have our budget number set and we know that that is $23,258,860, we can now compare that to the town's revenue number and get a better idea of what our deficit is. And Bob Messeri, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, has some good news about some funds that they're going to be able to shift to the school department. Bob?
I met with the town administrator, Mr. Delaney, the town finance director, this morning. This afternoon. We did get about at 1:30 an update to the Senate budget. They put some additional money back. It amounted to $58,000 for the town. We also had in our latest budget included in the fixed cost deal, which is a piece that's shared by both school and town, monies to cover potential adds to the town health insurance program. Now, I'm not talking about the cost of the program. We have made the changes to that program. This was additional subscribers to the program. The thought that in this economy, if a husband or wife loses a job, and the husband or wife works for the school department or the town, and they lost their insurance, they would be then eligible to join the town insurance policy. So we had budgeted $126,000 to cover the potential of 10 family insurance ads. We've removed that from the budget. knowing that we still have that, potentially that exposure, but it's an